Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream Public Media are made possible by PNC and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, where we are devoted to conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. Today's Wednesday, December 4th. I'm Dan Malthrop. I'm the chief executive here, and I'm pleased to introduce our forum today, which is the Ron Cohen Forum on Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Ron, of course, was the founder of the accounting and advisory firm Cohen & Company. He passed away this past year, and we remember him fondly. With us today is Ari Weinzweig. Ari and his partner Paul Saginaw founded Zingerman's Delicatessen in 1982 in Ann Arbor. At the time, Ari had somewhat limited experience in food service. He was a dishwasher with a BA in Russian history from the University of Michigan. They opened the doors, Ari and Paul, with 2 employees, the 2 of them, 25 seats, a small selection of specialty foods, and some very exceptional sandwiches. Today, Zingerman's Delicatessen is a nationally renowned food icon, and the Zingerman's community of businesses has grown to 11 businesses with 750 employees and something in the neighborhood of $70 million in annual revenue. Ari Weinzweig is also a prolific writer, as you can see by the books he has stacked on the table. He's a catalog of books, pamphlets, and chapbooks on leadership, business, all of which seem to have a lot of poetry, history, and philosophy in the mix as well. Ari does a lot of leadership training as well. Yesterday, there were about 150 guests gathered here in this room for a free day-long workshop with Ari and his colleagues covering Zingerman's 12 natural laws of business. I'll quote my favorite of those laws here. It's number 9. Success means you get better problems. Right? They're pretty good. And there are 11 more of those, where that came from. Our format today is a conversation, as you can see. Ari will be speaking with local author Dan Coyle. Dan is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Culture Code, which was named Best Business Book of the Year by Bloomberg, BookPal, and Business Insider. Dan has served as an advisor to many high-performing organizations, including the Navy SEALs, Microsoft, Google, and our very own Cleveland Guardians. If you have questions for Ari and you'd like to text them, you can text them to 330-541-5794, and we will work to put them into the second half of the program. Members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming Ari Weinzweig and Dan Coyle.
Thanks. The bell means we have to fight, right? Is that how it works? I heard a bell. Yeah.
No fighting.
No fighting. No fighting.
That's a belief.
I'm curious to start with why you guys are here. How many of you are here because you're huge fans of Zingerman groupies? That's a lot. Okay. I should just be quiet then, shouldn't I? I should just take it over. How many are here because you're curious about entrepreneurship, the business side of things, building a business, you work in a business? Anybody here interested in creativity, especially in creativity? All right. It's a pretty good mix. Pretty good mix. So I guess how this is going to go today, we're going to talk for like 30 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions, and then if we do our job right, I think you'll walk away with like a mental model of why Zingerman's is so incredible, and also maybe 1 or 2 things you could do in your business or your life tomorrow differently. So that would be what success kind of looks like.
That's your vision?
That's the vision. That's my vision, you might say. So I guess I came to know Ari by researching a book about flourishing, which is places that create joy, well-being, and the ability to create their own future. And I was looking for places like that fit this bill. I came across Zingerman's story, and I'd heard of Zingerman's for many years, but to see this place grow, you know those videos where they have like a seed and you see a cross-section of the roots going down and a stop motion where it's going, you see how fast it grows? That's what Zingerman's has done, growing into this incredible community of businesses. And so I guess my first question for you, Ari, is as a kid who grew up eating cinnamon brown sugar frosted Pop-Tarts, mac and cheese, and Mrs. Paul's fish sticks, how did you come to care? You know, we talk about people having passion. A lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of creative people have got a passion. You've got a passion for food. How did that come to be? As a busboy and a dishwasher, where you end up now is kind of surreal.
Well, I was a line cook and a kitchen manager in between opening, just so that doesn't get lost in the story. But just by accident. By the way, Mrs. Paul's Fish Sticks originated in Pittsburgh, so not that far from here. I looked up the history. But anyway, just by accident. So I'm a Russian history major. I studied anarchism, which we may or may not talk about. They don't promote it that very much. Well, I write, you can laugh, but I actually write a lot about the application of anarchism to modern organizations. So one version of this story would be how to use anarchism to make Zingerman's what it is. But anyway, there isn't much you can do with a Russian history degree except go get more degrees, which is what I was clearly supposed to do. I had no vision at all when I graduated. I had only what your friend and the person I admire, who through his writing and speaking, David White, calls the via negativa. You might not have heard the term, but you might have experienced it. It's where you're really, really clueless on where you want to go, but you're super clear on where you don't want to go. I knew I didn't want to go home. In order to not go home, I needed a job. I'd driven a taxi part-time while I was in school, which was perfectly fine, but not particularly uplifting or inspiring, so that was kind of out. One of my college roommates was waiting tables at a restaurant in downtown Ann Arbor, so I went in there thinking, I don't know, he seemed to like his job. I didn't know what else to do, so I went in there and applied for the same job he had. Actually, if they had hired me, I wouldn't have been a line cook because I would have ended up in the dining room. But they interviewed me. They said they'd call after a couple of weeks. They hadn't called, so my anxiety level was going higher and higher. So I went back and I reapplied, and I offered to bus tables and thinking, okay, if I do good work, maybe they'll promote me to server later. Once again, they interviewed me. Once again, after 2 weeks, they hadn't called, and so rent was clearly coming due at the end of the month, and so I went back and offered to do anything. And they said, do you want to wash dishes? And I had never worked in food, so I didn't know washing dishes was a highly undesirable job. And so I said, yeah, awesome, I'll take it. And they said, great, can you start tomorrow? So that's really how I lucked out. Nobody in my family was in business. They were all teachers, doctors, lawyers, dentists, psychologists, so I was the total failure for not getting an advanced degree. I had no intention of staying in food or business. In hindsight, I had kind of low-grade negative beliefs about business. It mostly seemed like it did bad things to people, and I didn't have any particular interest in it. I just needed a job. So I really ended up with, I read the quote yesterday, but Paul Goodman, the anarchist educator, mid-20th century philosopher, he said, having a vocation is like falling in love, and it works out. And I lucked out because everybody in this room, I would imagine, has fallen in love when it didn't work out, and that could be with people, but also with ideas or with career paths or philosophies, and it didn't work out. But in my case, I stumbled into that, and then also into great people. So Paul Saginaw, who Dan mentioned, who's been my business partner for all these decades now, was the general manager. His first day was my first day. Here we are.
I want to go into the love part.
Okay.
Like, you talked about wanting to create a Reuben so juicy that the juice ran down your arm when you bit into it.
Yeah.
It's a good vision. It's clear,
yes, it is.
right?
It is.
What made you fall in love with it? It still does. It's accidental, but I've been in a lot of accidental situations, and I didn't end up building an $80 million business around it. Like, what was the calling, or how did you explore that interest once you were exposed to that world?
I think that, well, I mean, how I understand love now is much clearer than it would have been then. But I think from the beginning, a lot of what I taught yesterday in The Natural Laws of Business, which is in the first book out there, it's really what Paul and I, and probably most of the people in this room, were already just doing instinctively, intuitively, because it seemed like the right thing. One was to try to keep getting better all the time. It's not, Dan mentioned natural law number 9, which is success means you get better problems. Natural law number 8 is you got to keep getting better all the time. None of these will be super shocking for many of the people in the room. We just were driven, it's like, let's make it better, and not to make it good enough to sell a lot, but driven mostly 95% internally, so not what people were asking for. That's a different situation. It's also important, but to really start with how did we feel about it, and how could we make it better and better and better all the time. And that search is still going on. I mean, we're in the process of working on switching to butter in the biscuits at the Zingerman's Roadhouse, which are already a huge seller that we never get complaints on, but we know we can make them better because we stumbled on this awesome butter that we, so it's just this work of constantly trying to make it better and better.
So that's what the first 1,300 square feet, brick building, you're kicking ass, it's really good, you get really, really good for 10 years, and then there's a moment in 1993, a moment in 1993 where you have a conversation on a bench that if we're looking at Zingerman's history as a moment of insights and epiphanies, that was one. Describe what happened and why it mattered.
Okay. That was a very good CNN interview question.
Right now.
Well, it's not like we went from 1982 to 1993 in a minute.
We got half an hour, dude.
I know. Many things were happening, but by 1990, so when we started the first natural law businesses that everybody who's getting to greatness, and I say greatness not meaning the most money, but living a life that feels fulfilling of their own design, whether that's collectively as an organization, because not-for-profits is the same as for-profits, or as an individual, they all have a vision. And they may not call it a vision, but they all have imagined this future that they're going towards. And we know that. Every child is born with the ability to do that. Later, we get socialized out of it by getting trained in school to be fearful of failure and trying to guess the right answer. But in our heart, we know what we want to do. So when we opened the deli, we did not know anything about the visioning process that I write a lot about and that we use all the time. But in hindsight, which is the way history is told, and this is in the Story of Visioning pamphlet, we knew from the beginning we wanted something really special, something unique, not a copy of Detroit, LA, Chicago, or whatever. We wanted something that was going to be true to Ann Arbor and true to us. We knew we wanted great food, great service, really wonderful place for people to work, and do it in a very down-to-earth setting, which today sounds less radical, but in 1982, for those who can remember, you kind of had to get dressed up to get really good food. It wasn't really something you could show up like I am right now. And I once had to get special permission to speak at the country club in Washington, D.C. to a group, because they only let you in with a jacket, and the client had a petition to let me in. But anyway, and we knew from the beginning we only wanted one. So that was really clear in our minds. We didn't write it down, but like all people who start a business, something's clear, the image is clear in their head. Anyway, the day you're talking about happened sometime in the summer of 1993. I don't know what day it was. I don't remember. It was about 10 in the morning. It was a lot warmer than it is today. And Paul, my business partner, sat me down on the bench in front of the deli. By this point, we had about 100 and some employees. We'd been in the New York Times, Gourmet, Bon Appetit, all that stuff that, in quotes, makes you a success. And sort of with no warning, it was about like this, except I was on that side, I think. And he said, he goes, 10 years, what are we doing? I was like, what? It's like, in 10 years, what are we doing? I'm like, Paul, I don't have any idea what we're doing in 10 years. And he's like, well, I mean, we said we only want one place, so we've already, by this point, turned down offers from Chicago and Detroit and probably Cleveland and whatever. And people are opening on campus and they're copying us, and it's not as good, but it's eating into our market, and because we won't open, like, what are we doing in 10 years? And I'm like, dude, I don't know. I got work to do. And he's like, no, this is our work. So in hindsight, what he was asking me is, what's your vision? I don't think he had one. That said, it's not like we were satisfied with the status quo. Like I said earlier, when you asked about the food, we've always been about continuous improvement long before there was a Toyota Way. But the point is that I have come to understand there's a huge difference between just improving the status quo and going after an inspiring vision of the future that you really believe in. And so his question prompted a year-long, a lot of long walks, long talks, lots of swear words, frustrations, eye rolls, but continually, as we still do now, systemically coming back to the table till we can come to agreement. During that time, we met a guy named Stash Kazmierski, who changed our lives by teaching us what we call visioning. He had learned it from a guy named Ron Lippitt, who was at University of Michigan in the late 50s, 60s, 70s at the Institute of Social Research. And it's basically writing the story of your future before it happens. And in the construct of the business world at large, unlike most business teaching, which tells you to figure out the right answer so you can find the hole in the market and make a lot of money, this is where you're coming from the heart. It's your art, it's your story, it's whatever you want to create. So there's no right visions or wrong visions, in the context of which you can, I don't care, go public and make billions, or you could keep with 2 employees and never grow. Many of my friends of my age group are retiring or retired or selling their business. I'm trying to work more. I got a lot to do and I'm running out of years. It's not like one is good and one is bad. It's just being clear from the heart on what you want to really create. And out of that vision, out of that conversation, we wrote our first formal vision. Again, it's in that pamphlet, but it's called Zingerman's 2009. So those who are quick at math will realize we actually went 15 years in the future, not 10. It's about 6 pages long, which is now short by our current standards, but at the time was, mind-blowing. And that vision described that rather than going down the most typical paths, which would be to open 500 Zingermans all over the country, go public, sell it to a big company and make money, we would create a community, what we called a community of businesses that would all, as Dan so nicely described, be located in the Ann Arbor area, so everything's within 15 minutes, one to the next. Each would be a Zingerman's business, but each would be unique, so that way we could stay true to the original vision of only having the one deli. Each would have a managing partner or partners in it, because our experience of ourselves and elsewhere was when there was no owner on site, generally, not always, the energy declined and the feel of it just was never the same. And that we would operate as one synergistic organization with these semi-autonomous pieces in it. So it wasn't ever meant as Paul and I invest in other people. It was always, how do we create one organization?
Yeah. And just how, it strikes me just how much of a complete reversal that is of most business thinking. As you said, most of it is how do we scale? How do we, and to be clear, they're turning down offers of, I don't know if this was reported, so I don't know if it's true, but a $50 million offer from Walt Disney World to come.
There was no money attached to, Disney wanted us to open in Orlando.
Okay, yeah.
And it's a true story. Yeah. I could tell it. I've told it, it's no secret. I mean, they after like 39 emails to set up the meeting, because it wasn't just me and the guy who wanted to talk to me, it was his team. And I already knew the answer because we had our, the vision says what you're going to do. So we only open in the Ann Arbor area, right? So anyway, he goes through the whole thing, and I couldn't get a word in edgewise, and he keeps talking and telling me all this stuff, and finally after, 15, 20 minutes, he stops, and so I was like, we're really honored. It's really an honor that you're interested in having us open down there, but our vision is that we only open in the Ann Arbor area, and so it's not a good fit. And he's like, I don't think you understand. We've spent 2 years. I hope there's nobody here from Disney. We've spent 2 years researching this, We've narrowed it down to 50 restaurants that are in this finalist to get on there, and I'm like, no, it sounds awesome, but our vision is that we only open in the Ann Arbor area. So, said with respect, it's not something that we're going to do. He goes, really, I don't think you understand. He's like, the restaurants that open in Disney, I don't remember the numbers, but, like 50% or 500%, same store, he's like throwing all these statistics at me. I'm like, it sounds great. I'm really honored, but our vision is, and then he started again, and I said, if you want to open Disney in Ann Arbor, then maybe we could talk about it. And he said, well, I don't think that's going to happen. And then he said, he said, I don't think that's going to happen. I said, well, then I don't think this is going to happen either. And that was the end of it.
That's so good.
And I'm not saying it's because we're so great. It's just being true to, like, when you know where you want to go and you stay true to it, it doesn't matter if it's 50 billion. It's, I might do it for world peace, but beyond that, there's no point.
I think
because
there's something
you're just selling yourself out.
There's something really deep there, because we talked about this before, and I was asking, why would you turn that down? And Ari pointed at my wedding ring and said, you turned down a lot of opportunities too. Right? And that's kind of his move. Like, he makes something really obvious, but it's hard to do the obvious thing sometimes. It's hard to do the simple thing of staying true to that vision and that horizon that you want to go toward. And you guys have done a hell of a job of doing that.
Well, I think yes, it is, and I think it's way harder for most people because they don't write down their vision. And so, my mind, like I imagine many people's, is all over the place. I mean, the mind doesn't move in linear fashion, and so, I can think of quitting and staying for 20 more years within 2 minutes of each other. I can think, no, I mean, they're not,
Yeah, for real.
it's not a logically oriented process of thinking. So when you're not clear on where you're going, you could talk yourself into anything. And the social pressure to conform, Rollo May, the mid-20th century psychologist, said the opposite of courage is not cowardice, it's conformity. There's enormous pressure to conform in the family, conform in society. This is what business people do. And, when we wrote the 2009 vision and people started to hear about it, like Maggie Bayless, who was the founding partner at Zingtrain, our training business in 1994, and she actually was, when we rolled out the vision that year, she was at Michigan getting her MBA. She was a German lit major from Oberlin, not far from here, but she actually went back to grad school. I never did. But anyway, so she was in business school, and she's like, it came up, and her professors were like, those guys are idiots. Like, why would they do that? There's a clear, obvious gold mine that they're turning down by not going national. And, but I don't mean the money's irrelevant, but it's not the most important thing.
Well, there's something deep there, too. When we say vision, we often think it's just something that lives in our heads. But when you made the point, you have to write it down.
Yeah.
What happens when you write it down? And what happens, because you didn't just write it down once. You wrote it down, and then you had conversations about it that lasted, you said, a year, 6 months?
Well, we didn't write it down first. The conversation concluded with a finished document after a lot of
What happens when you write it down? And why is that different? Because I think a lot of times we talk about our vision, but we're not writing stuff down.
I don't think it's impossible to use vision without writing it down, but because clearly people do. I mean, all y'all got here today. So I think that but I will say organization, well, and even as an individual, it's way more powerful to write it down. Mm-hmm. Like, even if you're a single person living on your own, but you write down from the heart your 10-year vision and you share it with the people you care about, it will change everything. It changes in no particular order. Your decision making. So that Disney thing could have been like a year of arguments and whatever, but it was 20 minutes.
Cool.
It allows people to help you in actually productive ways. Has anybody here ever gotten unsolicited advice? No one raised their hand, but I'll take the laugh to be an affirmative. So when anybody get it from their parents? No matter how old you are, you can still remember it, right? So when your parents gave you unsolicited advice, they're trying to help you get to the vision that they have for you. The problem is it's just not all that aligned often with the one you have for yourself. In permaculture, Toby Hemingway is a very fascinating author, and he's not the only one who said it, but they say nature abhors a vacuum. So if you leave an empty ground in nature, it will fill itself in, often with weeds, in our context. So if you don't share a vision, the vacuum is filled by other people who can imagine awesomely what you're going to do with your life, and they'll try to help you get there. When you actually have the vision, they can help you. And it's very common, 6 degrees of separation, all the stuff that you and I deal with all the time. Like, there's somebody in this room right now that could help somebody else in this room with a resource that they just don't know you want. And it's just when you share the vision, all that starts to become clear. Then there's a quote from this guy Coyle in his Culture Code book that talks about how which I didn't know this till many years later when I read your book, but that it unleashes, I'm going from memory, you could probably remember the line, it unleashes this huge source of energy when you've imagined the future that you're going for. Mm-hmm. So, and I'll come back to, it's a natural human behavior. So you work with the guardians, they all envision how the pitcher is imagining, they're envisioning, they don't write it down, but they're envisioning where the ball's gonna go. Like, we all learn to do this. Everybody with little kids has imagined a healthy relationship with your child when the child is an adult. Like, you all do. And when you wanna kill them now, one more reason not to, because you'll never get to your vision. Everybody who runs races imagines finishing. Like, it's just, this is what we do, and so this is taking a natural human process and putting it to work in a way in an organization, instead of what I would suggest is actually the counter-human process of starting with strategic planning, which is guessing the right answer.
Yes, questions, exploring questions. Well, and I think this is a great example of what Zingerman does really well, which is they've systematized visioning to where it's a normal part of a day. It's a We went to, some of the Guardians went to dinner up in Zingerman's, and we were talking about vision, and Zach, who was the manager of the Roadhouse, said, oh, here's our vision for today. And he had written it out, and he brought it to us, and we all read it together.
Yeah, they write a vision for the shift. So we use visioning for everything, to be clear.
So they systematize the soft stuff. So I think that's something that's really powerful and interesting, the way you do that, because these are difficult, kind of squishy areas to go into, but you've found recipes, I think you call them, ways to do it. And maybe, I think this group, maybe the energy one would be interesting to them. Like, what ones do you think have been the most impactful?
Service, dignity.
Yeah. Dignity, yeah, right.
Dignity. Well, the idea of recipes, the work around that really I learned from Maggie Bayless at Zing Train, because her passion was training. And, I can't remember exactly how the conversations would start, but inevitably, like, I would be really frustrated with something that was going on. Like, that feeling, like, why don't they get it? Anybody had that feeling? Okay, so she would point out to me, which was right, and now I've internalized it, but when I have that feeling, or when you have that feeling, it is always an unclear expectation of others. There's something that we wanted. We might not have even acknowledged it to ourselves, but we're waiting for it. And so she would drag it out of me, with, we don't have those big white sheets up, but, I would talk, and she would write up list after list after list, and then she'd go, is there anything else? I'm like, probably after 4 sheets. And she, and then she would say, well, that's great for the end of 2 years of training, but we need to give something to people on their first day or second day or third day that they can use. So the idea that we ended up with was these things called recipes, which is how do you create a model that you can teach to anybody, whether it's you, a new busboy, a PhD, or a high school dropout, that it can be learned by anybody and that it can be applied consistently. And I think one of the keys of it, and then we can talk dignity quickly and then maybe go to audience stuff if you want at some point, but is there's a difference between a standard operating procedure and what we call organizational recipes. And there's an essay on this in the first book. So standard operating procedures are great. Like if I were flying home, we're driving, but if I were flying home, like I want the pilot to use the checklist. I've had some surgeries, maybe you have too. I'm not really interested in the surgeon's creative application of sanitation. I want them to go through the checklist, the standard operating procedure for sanitation. But if you mismatch what's appropriate for a standard operating procedure, which is basically, you could call a mass system, with what needs to be a recipe, you're in trouble. Why? Because when people put an SOP for customer service, you end up getting some really dumb answers. Because people are following a rule that's the same for every situation, when I'm not even the same, what I want isn't even the same from today to tomorrow. Like sometimes I want a long history of each food, and sometimes I'm in a big hurry and I'm late for a meeting and I got to get out of the building, and the service provider's job is to intuit, sense through questions, through curiosity, what is it that's going on for me, read my body language, read my energy, read my tone of voice, my speed of conversation, and come up with the right answer. So if you follow a standard operating procedure for something like visioning, you end up with cookie cutter visions. If you follow it for customer service, you're fine for 60%, but you alienate the other 40% that it was totally wrong for. So the recipe, like cooking, requires the cook to put their own skill, expertise. You still have to taste for salt. How cold the pot is today versus how cold the pot was or hot it was in August is going to change the recipe. Whether the beans were 14 months old or 14 weeks old is going to change the cook time. So the cook has to still bring their acumen, but the recipe guides them towards the right answer.
And what would be a sample recipe, say, for?
Well, for customer service, since I started on that, so this is, again, many months of conversation to get to it, but we've been teaching it for 30-something years. First step, figure out what the customer wants. In there, we teach what we call the 10-4 rule, which is like a sub-recipe, we would call it in the kitchen. at 10 feet, make eye contact and smile. You'll all look at me now. And 4 feet, greet them. Super simple. And then we teach sub-elements of that. How do you find out what they want, et cetera, et cetera. Second step, get it for them. Duh. Accurately, politely. And then we ended up adding a third sub-step, which is enthusiastically, because some nice employees showed us you could be polite and accurate, but show you didn't really mean it. Like, yes, sir. We'll get right on it. You know, so we added enthusiastically. So find out what they want, get it for them accurately, politely, enthusiastically. And then the third step, which for our world is creating great service, is we call go the extra mile. So it's do something extra for the guest that they didn't ask for. It often costs next to nothing. It could be helping somebody to the car on an icy day. It could be bringing a taste. It could be bringing a crayon for their kid. Like, there's a million little things. It could be an extra thank you note, a callback, whatever, but it's just something that really blows people away that you took the time to do it. So those 3 steps are the same with ZingTrain, which I'm here with today. It's the same for corporate gifts. It's the same if you come in to get a cup of coffee. Do we do it 100% every time? Of course not. In my fantasy, we do, but in reality, we don't. But if we do it 50, 60, 70% of the time, it's awesome. And then we apply that also between each other as colleagues. So it's happening within the organization because it needs to be congruous with what we want to create on the outside.
I see we're at the 32-minute mark, Ari, so we're supposed to open it up for questions, and maybe
Well, I am anarchistic, so
You are anarchistic.
he won't like it, but we could break the rules. You know, we actually teach the staff to break the rules.
Good. We'll do it now then. Talk about dignity, because that feels like it bridges some of these things together.
We do teach the staff to break the rules because there's exceptions to every rule, and if you don't acknowledge those and do the right thing, a lot of bad service can happen. Dignity. So the story Dignity goes back, it'll be 3 years in the end of February, and it happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, February 22nd. And I think I'm just going to read you a few lines from the pamphlet. So we got the one version of Zingerman's history already. Mm-hmm. This is a different one. The day this version of Zingerman's history got going was a Thursday. It was February 24th, 2022. In Ann Arbor, it was an unremarkable morning, cold and sunny as it can often be that time of year. In Kyiv, it was a few degrees warmer and markedly more overcast. But in Ukraine's ancient capital city, the day was, in the worst possible way, far more memorable. It's the day Russian tanks rolled across the border en masse. For many Americans I've spoken to, the Russian invasion was sad, but not necessarily all that significant. For me, though, it was a different story. The Russian attack hit me hard. After a few days, I started to realize that I didn't just feel down, I had sunk into despair. So I'm not here to tell you that that invasion is the worst catastrophe of human history. Yuval Noah Harari, the historian, pointed out there's no hierarchy of emotion, so how we each react to different things is our own. But the main point of it is just what do you do with despair? And I don't feel despair that much. I wrote a whole book on managing ourselves, which is all the stuff I screwed up and learned to deal with. So I've become fairly reasonably good at it in order to avoid despair. But when it hits, I kind of hit bottom, so to speak, emotionally. Then I do what history majors do, which is start studying. And I knew a lot about Russian history, not like PhD professor level, but by the average American standards. But I realized I actually knew next to nothing about Ukrainian history. And so I started studying Ukraine. And despite Vladimir Putin's claim that it's the same country, it's actually not true at all. It's more likely Russia came out of Ukraine than the other way around. You'll make me cry. Thank you. Well, I was just listening again this morning when I was running to Timothy Snyder's talk on the history of Ukraine. But anyway, I started to study, and I stumbled on what everybody in Ukraine already knew, which is that in the summer of 2013, the Ukrainian president, very closely aligned with Russia, started to negotiate with the EU to sign an agreement that would bring Ukraine more aligned with the EU. And it doesn't seem like that big a deal from here, but if you imagine that you're 19 years old and you were in Ukraine, and you couldn't go to Paris for a year abroad. You couldn't just do what we do and get on a plane and go to London or Rome. You could go to Moscow, you could go to St. Petersburg, you could go to Minsk, but it wasn't an option. And so when they were going to sign this agreement, it was a really big deal, and people's hope levels got really high, especially younger people. And then in the fall of 2013, at the last minute, he changed his mind, and he canceled this, and people freaked. I would imagine many went into despair, especially students and younger people. On November 21st, 2013, people began to go out on the square in Kyiv, which is called the Maidan. You might have heard the term. It's the central square, and protest. There was anywhere from a few hundred up to 200,000 people were out there every night. The weather is what we all live in, so it's not like hanging out in San Francisco. It's 9 degrees or whatever, so they stayed out there every night up until the early February. The president of Ukraine had the not good idea to send in the police. Finally, he couldn't take it, so he's like, we're going to send in the police, we're going to beat them up, and their parents are going to come pull them out. But it backfired because the parents joined the kids. On February 22nd of 2014, he fled, and that came to be called the Revolution of Dignity. So when I read that, I was like, now I know what to do, because I had felt incredibly helpless sitting in Ann Arbor. What do I do about what's going on over there? There's nothing to do. And when I read that, I'm like, okay, I know what to do. If we make dignity a reality, I can treat everybody with dignity. We can make dignity the norm in our organization, because I'm going to suggest in countries where dignity is the everyday norm, people like Putin don't come to power. And conversely, I'm going to suggest we couldn't do business in Russia the way that we do, because people have been trained not to think. They've been trained not to break the rules. They've been trained not to ever make waves. And we're trying to do the opposite. So that really is where this came from. And I know the history image that people have is that revolutions happen on one day, but they don't. They happen slowly over time, and it really happens, and this is one of my learnings from anarchism, in the way we treat each other. That's the revolution. And so there's a recipe very quickly for dignity, and then we'll get to those questions on the floor, but of how you do it, because I had the idea of dignity, but then what the heck is dignity? Like, I got to go do it. So here's my 6 things. I don't say they're the right ones, but they've been working for the last few years. The first is to honor the humanity of everybody that we deal with. There's nobody like you in the whole world. And I don't care if statistics are fine, but you're still one of one. And so it's to honor, whether it's the dishwasher, the person we just fired, the one I'm really frustrated with, the person who didn't vote like I did, or who, whatever, is to honor who they are. They all got pain, they all got challenges, they all got hopes and dreams, etc. The second one is to be authentic, but parenthetically added, without acting out. So, having a tantrum and going, I'm just telling you how I feel, is not what I'm talking about. There's ways to be vulnerable, share our anxieties, share our fears, that don't dump it and treat the other person with indignity and still be real. The third is to have everybody give everybody a meaningful say. It doesn't mean you have to vote. There's many ways to have a meaningful say, but what it doesn't mean is you do some focus group that HR runs in another building and then you read a report. That's not a meaningful say. This is where there's a meaningful, open-minded conversation in whatever form. The fourth is to begin with positive beliefs, which is a whole nother conversation, and it's in that big beliefs book out there, but is to really just choose to believe the best about everybody, even if we don't agree. Doesn't mean I got to stay silent, but I can choose to believe they're doing the best they can with what they got. The fifth is to help everybody around us get to greatness. And last is, I think, the hardest, is to create some reasonable form of equity. And it's challenging. I don't claim we're there. I can argue it 100 different ways to China or to Russia, but the point is just, if we do those 6, because equity doesn't just mean money, it means equity of attention, equity of resources for education, et cetera, et cetera. If we do those 6, I think it makes dignity. And I think actually, and I'll stop, you can't have democracy without dignity.
It was such a natural, like, applause moment.
Rule breaker.
Rule breaker, yes. Hi, again. I'm Dan Moulthrop here at the City Club, and we're about to begin the audience Q&A. As you know, we have with us today Ari Weinzweig, CEO and co-founder of Zingerman's, and he's in conversation with Dan Coyle, New York Times bestselling author and our moderator. We are discussing what we're calling the secret sauce of Zingerman's entrepreneurial success. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, any students who are with us or joining us online, and anyone joining us online as well at cityclub.org. If you'd like to text a question, again, that number is 330-541-5794, and we'll try to work it into the program. May we have our first question, please?
I'm going to work in one of those text questions right now. So, the Cleveland Browns will likely move to the western suburbs of the city away from its downtown lakefront home. Many businesses here rely on traffic from home games. As an entrepreneur who also sees increased traffic during home Michigan football games, what advice might you give these downtown businesses that may be impacted by a stadium move?
I don't know. Well, kind of what everybody here knows. Either try to figure out some other ways to get income. I don't want to move our business, but I guess you could consider moving. Look at what you could do that nobody else is doing. I come from the school of if everybody's already doing this, instead of following, I just try to go to the opposite end. So while everybody's going to online ordering, it's better to go to personal ordering. So it's just what can you do that the second natural law of business is you got to give people compelling reasons to come to you, which is probably not shocking when you think about it, but most businesses don't give people compelling reasons. They're convenient, it's fine, it's not unpleasant, but that's not compelling. Compelling's like that you're going to drive 2 hours out of your way to go there or an hour out of your way because there's something that's so special about what they have. And so I guess that's universal advice for me and for everybody, but what can you do that is going to make people come to where you are even when there's no stadium?
Hi, Ari. I'm Matt. So I've done a lot of work on visioning recently, and so I was wondering if you could talk about this content that I've been consuming talks a lot about being directionally correct. So you're talking about Zingerman's 2009 with like a 15-year plan. So how often
Vision, not plan.
Yes, sorry, vision.
They're different, so it's, yeah.
So the visioning that I'm talking about, the entrepreneurs that I'm listening to, they're talking about being directionally correct so that on a 15-year time horizon is not as distinct and it allows you to be more plastic so you can move stuff around. And so how did you stay to the vision or go off of the vision within the 15 years, if that makes sense?
Well, it sounds like you're not saying this judgmental. I mean, you're talking about other people's perspectives on, yeah. So we have a different perspective. I'm not saying theirs is wrong. It's just ours is kind of the opposite. So, more of the world is doing that than does what we do. And I can only speak to what we do. But for us, that would be more what we would look at as a mission statement. It's like the North Star. I wrote about ours and why they're valuable in the first book. But so mission is timeless. It's broad. I like our mission a lot. It's served us really, really well for any number of reasons I won't get into now. But you don't know if you got there. And there's nothing in our mission that precludes us from opening 1,000 Zingermans or going public or going global. The vision is different because the vision. So the business school version of mission and vision, I can't tell the difference. No disrespect. I've tried. They seem like the same thing, and I've never met anybody yet who actually can explain it. So I feel like it's like the emperor's new clothes. Everybody goes, yeah, I never got it either. But anyway, the vision for us is the opposite. It's a story. It's a detailed story It's the story of your life, individually, collectively, whatever, written in the future as if it's already happened, with a lot of detail, emotionally engaging, strategically sound, meaningful detail. So our vision for 2032 includes a whole section on love, which I read to the group yesterday. It also talks about food, it talks about service, it talks about working with young people, it talks about diversity, it talks about our ecological commitment, and it's a story. So there's things in there that would never show up in a business school version of a vision. But everybody in this room that sells anything knows that people buy on emotion and justify on fact. And so writing the story of your life based on so loosely that anything works, we would go to Disney and he wouldn't be married still. Well, if you don't get clear on where you're going, I mean, I referenced the Alice in Wonderland thing yesterday. Anybody remember Alice in Wonderland? So Alice is walking along the road. She comes to the fork in the road. She doesn't know which way to go, but she looks up and conveniently there's a Cheshire cat sitting up in the tree. So Alice asks the appropriate question, which is, which road should I take? And the cat appropriately asks back, where are you going? Alice's response, you might remember, is, I'm not really sure. And then the cat, in one of the best answers of all time, says, well, then any road will get you there. And that's true. If we have no vision, then any road will work. And then it's just trying to figure out in the moment. It's like trying to travel based on, like, at every intersection, you're having a strategic argument over what looks better, left or right. So I'll leave the curse words out, but throw that other stuff out, man. It's just, it doesn't work.
Ari, thanks for coming to Cleveland. Under your understanding of Dan's definition of flourishing, could you just tell a short story of somebody who's flourishing in your ecosystem and why and how that happened?
Yeah, I could probably tell a lot. Well, it's hard not to tell the one I told yesterday. So there's a manager at the Roadhouse who's been there 2 years maybe now. She's, I don't know, worked in our industry and other industries in management for 20 years. Before she got to us, she was at another restaurant in town. Her friend had come to work with us as a bartender and was like, you got to come over here. You should, you'd really like it, whatever. So she did. 3 months, 4 months, 2 months later, she tells this story. She's a single mother with 3 kids, and she lives in Toledo, so it's a 45-minute drive back and forth each way. Anyway, 3 months in, she goes, I went home yesterday, and one of my kids starts going, Mom, you're different. She's like, what do you mean? They're like, you're so much nicer. I mean, this is what it is, so it's just one story, but there's lots, but we're all products. Natural law number 4 is that we do our best work when we're part of a great organization. Organization could be the City Club, it could be the Cleveland Guardians, it could be us, it could be your family, your friendship circle, whatever. But it's almost impossible to do great work and be grounded within yourself when you're surrounded by wackiness. And that includes what news channels you watch and whatever. Osho, the Indian mystic, said to be sane in an insane asylum is dangerous. And she was sane in an insane asylum, and I'm being metaphorical, not literal, but then when you get into sanity, like, you could relax and be yourself, and this is going on all over the world, right? And so if she's going home getting treated with indignity from her other job and is constantly tense and essentially angry and not learning how to manage that in her workplace, then it's going into her kids. Like, there's no other way around it, and so that anger from the kid goes to the school, and it goes to the playground, and then the teacher's calling in the parent. Now the parent's even angrier because they had to give up their bowling evening or I don't know what to go to the parent-teacher conference. Now the teacher's mad. And I'm not exaggerating, like that's spreading through the whole country. And it starts at work. And so the swing in 3 months, like this isn't a six-year-old, like in 3 months, she went from being perfectly fine as a manager in this other business that it changed her energy and her groundedness so much from being around a healthier place that it changed her energy with her kids who noticed it and said something. Pretty good.
Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for being. Without you, I'd just be me and Dan looking at a big room.
Well, I'm here because I'm a Zingerman's groupie, and you talked about crafting an experience that folks want to go to, and I make a point of actually going up to Zingerman's from Cleveland for a day trip.
Thank you.
Every other month or so. And one of the things I notice anytime I come into the Zingerman's locations is the customer service and the people who are working. And for any of us who have ever worked in retail or food service, we all have our fake customer service voices, and we can all kind of recognize when other people are doing that as well, just to be polite. But one of the things I've always been super impressed about, and one of the reasons I come back to Zingerman's every other month or so, is because your people seem so genuinely invested emotionally and physically in being there. Whether that be at the deli counter talking about cheeses and meats, or whether that be ringing people out or making coffee, whatever it is, everyone I've ever interacted with there always seems so invested. And I love what you were talking about with creating a recipe instead of an SOP. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the recipe for getting that buy-in from your staff.
Yeah, good question, and thank you for the kind words. It means a lot because that's the point. There's no one thing. I have a new chapbook just came out called Life Lessons I Learned from Being a Line Cook. That's very little. I'm working on a pamphlet on organizational ecosystem. Oh, Katie has it, modeling it right in the back. It's very little. Anyway, I've been working for many years. It started in the Beliefs book on this model, metaphorical model for organizational ecosystems. And, you know, is anybody here in agriculture, farmers? Like a farmer, there's no one thing that a farmer does. It's everything, right? And so you can't just work on the soil for 2 years and then later we'll figure out the rest. And so I think it's all of it. What I would suggest but as an entry point is those natural laws of business I talked about yesterday. So I'm going to suggest that all of what we teach, part of why it works is because it's actually aligned with human nature and it honors people's humanity. And the business school version of stuff is actually antithetical to human nature. And they're teaching people how to behave in ways that are not who they are. And everything we teach, whether it's the visioning, the dignity, customer service, energy management, which we didn't talk about, like it's all 100% applicable at home. Like I need to do this with Tammy when I get home tonight. She does it with all the dogs that she rescues. She's doing the dignity. So it's really life skills. When we honor the natural laws of business, then we create a setting where people want to participate because we're helping them feel like themselves. And hopefully that's a lot of what you're experiencing. I'm going to suggest the inverse, though, is when organizations violate those natural laws of business. They can make a lot of money for a while, but it's dehumanizing instead of humanizing. And the result is what I've wrote about in the red book that's out there, the Being a Better Leader, is an energy crisis in the workplace, which is what you're describing in all those other settings, which is manifested and experienced. We've all been there. You see it in cynicism, apathy, disengagement, boredom, whatever. And that comes because people are treated in ways that they feel dehumanized. And I don't mean they use that word, but they feel like they don't matter. And if you get treated like you don't matter, then you act like you don't matter until you're so angry that one day you rage against the machine and bad things happen. In the Beliefs book, there's an essay about hope, 2 essays about hope, which is another subject I knew nothing about and that I started to study because I realized I happened to walk past 2 or 3 different situations where a manager who meant well, but I just happened to hear them say things that I realized were crushing the hope of the employee. But then I realized the obvious, which is it wasn't the manager's fault. It's our fault because we had never taught about hope. We had no recipe for hope. Why would they know anything about hope? I didn't really know anything about hope either. But when people have high hope, they do good work. People with low hope don't do good work. And it's more in the book, but when I started that work, I would have told you that the opposite of hope was hopelessness, but it's actually not. It's fear. And so when you have hope, you have fear of what could go wrong because you care about the future. When you're hopeless, the opposite is fearlessness. So people who are hopeless become reckless. So there's stuff I did at 16 that none of y'all would do because you got too much to lose. You might have done it at 16 too, I don't know. But the point is, hopeless employees, hopeless citizens take drastic actions because there's no hope for a better future. Why not smash the window? Like, go ahead, throw a book through the window, like whatever. You just wouldn't do it because you have a hope for a positive future.
Is
So
there a
I think
recipe for hope, Ari, you would
there is.
share?
Yeah, there is. I'm going to go see if I can go from memory. The first is to help people see a better future. Obviously, the vision is one super positive way to do that. The second is to help them see multiple paths to get there. I wouldn't have known this till I started studying it, but low hope people typically have no path to the future or one. The one path tends to not work out, and then they just give up. So if I were a low hope person, I would never have gone back to reapply at that restaurant all those decades ago because I would have like, oh well, never mind, they're not going to take me. The third one is to help people see that they matter as human beings. This has nothing to do with what they do at work. Even if they do terrible work, they still matter as a human being. This, of course, overlaps with the dignity stuff. The fourth is to see that that the work that they do matters. Most places people have been led to believe they're irrelevant. Like it's only the heroic boss that matters. They're just supposed to follow orders and they're irrelevant. The fifth one is to help them see that small things make an enormous difference. So low hope people are waiting for the miracle. They're waiting to hit the lottery. They're waiting to get the perfect job. They're waiting to get that one date that's going to change their whole life. High hope people understand it's tiny little things like that you don't get in shape by buying the gym membership, that you don't become wealthy by buying a lottery ticket, that you don't have a lot of savings by waiting until you have enough money to save it. So the little things matter. And then last but not least is to help people understand that they're part of something much greater than themselves. So all of these things are overlapping. It's not one path, which is the industrial model. The dehumanizing industrial revolution thing is to figure out the one thing. This whole approach is to realize there's all of these things happening at once, and you can't learn them all today. It's years and years of building the ecosystem, but everybody can learn these. And by the way, if you haven't already realized it, it all works with your kids. And the hope work is free, the visioning work is free, the dignity work is free. It's all, I'll leave the swear word out, free. But I like alliteration, so you can guess which one it was.
Ari's going to come back next week for a lecture on parenting, by the way.
I don't have kids, only dogs.
Ari Weinzweig, Dan Coyle, thank you so much. This is wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Before I close this out, a reminder that Ari's going to be signing books out in the Commons, and you're welcome to join us out there. I want to thank the team at Zingerman's for coming along, for shepherding Ari, for making sure he's on time, and for selling the books and everything else.
I've been on time.
Yeah, no, you were.
Just my email is ari@zingermans.com, so anybody that wants can email me. I'll answer you. If I fail to answer, which does happen, but is uncommon, but choose positive beliefs. I'm not trying to ignore you. And then I do an e-news every week, which today's will be out at 4 o'clock, and if you email me, I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
If you don't, I won't. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thanks also to the family and friends and colleagues of Ron Cohen, who helped us create the Ron, yes. the Ronald B. Cohen Forum on Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Cohen & Company continues to thrive after more than 40 years in business and is grounded in helping its clients, employees, and communities be successful. Mr. Cohen's vision and passion have continued to drive success in Northeast Ohio and nationally. And this forum, as I said, was established through a generous gift from Cohen & Company, the Cohen family, and Mr. Cohen's many friends and supporters and colleagues. We're so grateful to all of you for your support. Thank you so much. We would also like to welcome guests at tables hosted by Belonging Mindset, Friends of Megan Granson, and Huntington. Thank you all so much for being with us today. Up next at the City Club on Friday, December 6th, Beth Hammock. She's the new president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, and she'll provide her outlook for the economy. And this will be actually her first public address in her new role. So we hope you can join us for that or tune in on WKSU or at cityclub.org. You can learn more about this forum and all sorts of other things that are coming up at cityclub.org. That brings us to the end. Thank you all so much for being a part of this today. Ari, Dan, thank you. Thank you, Dan. Our forum is adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream Public Media are made possible by PNC and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.